So I've called this aggregating and transforming GIS data, but it's really, in a sense, I'm a sort of measured surveyor now, used to be a designer, but measured survey primarily as a sort of way into getting access to clients' asset data to do interesting stuff with it. I'm a one-man band, but I work for some quite big clients: Kingston University, Winchester City Council, Wilmot Dixon Interiors. In fact, just down the road, I've had a team on site yesterday setting out at Royal Sussex County Hospital. And yeah, I'm also chairman of Little Britain Challenge Cup, the construction industry yacht racing event. If you like sailing, talk to me about that afterwards. Founding member of it's definitely changed its name now, but it's Construction Verification Initiative, which is about scanning things and checking they're built right against models. And I'm also a team member of Survey for BIM. I'm not a surveyor. I've not had any formal training on surveying or geospatial, but I kind of learnt on the job, I suppose, is probably the best way to put it. And I'm enthusiastic for other people to do the same. So, my GIS journey, where did it start? About 2 years ago, I was looking at Facebook, and a local birding guy was asking about blackcaps. And I said, "Oh, if you'd like some help mapping those, sounds like an interesting project." And he said, well, he wasn't really interested in that, but he would keep my details. And about a year and a half later, last year, he messaged me back on Facebook and said, "Oh, I've got a project for you. Some people from Hampshire Ornithological Society need help mapping a survey of Dartford warblers, these chaps." And they sent me a spreadsheet with a load of, this is part of it, you can see a load of OS grid squares, monads they're called, those ones, 1 kilometre by 1 kilometre, which is a record of all of the territories they'd found across the New Forest. And I said, wow, this sounds great. This was the first map that we made, and I made this very, very quickly. So it's a chloropleth map, showing numbers of territories per monad, which is 1 kilometre square, across the New Forest. And really, this was basically what we did. We made a couple of other maps. So these show, this was nice actually, there was change over time. The green squares are squares where there hadn't been Dartford warblers previously, and then there were in the survey. And on the left-hand side, you're looking at data from 2014, if I remember rightly, and the right-hand side, data from 2018 compared with the 2023 survey. And then last of all, and this is probably the hardest one to make, so this is all the purple dots are all the individual territories, and obviously you've got the land boundary. The sort of brown shade is from the priority habitats inventory, which is something that DEFRA maintains for lowland heath. And the green shade is the area of the higher level stewardship part of the New Forest, which is effectively nature maintenance. The coloured boundaries are land ownership, which is effectively land ownership of some of the other contributors to the money for the survey, National Trust, and I can't remember all of the other ones. Yeah, so that was where it all started, and I love making these maps. I like birds as well, and they have come back to me since. Just before I get going on this, because I would encourage you to get into geospatial for the same sort of reasons. I mean, this was all voluntary work, to be fair, but I now use it in my business quite frequently. But who uses GIS in this room? Okay, so not that many, 3 out of 10, 11. There is this debate going on about GIS and BIM, and whether they're the same, whether they're different, whether GIS can take over from BIM. And so I thought I'd start off by just drawing some parallels with the two, because they are very similar, 2D and 3D geometry with non-graphical data, both of them. And actually often it's the same data, which is a good reason that we should be passing data back and forth from BIM. I generally steer clear of AI. Oh no, that's, I'm forgetting the order of my slides. But, so this gives you a flavour of what I think the difference between BIM and GIS is. Certainly for me, BIM mostly is taken up with authoring things, building stuff from scratch, perhaps setting them in a context that might have been supported by GIS. There's a lot of documentation, there's a lot of reporting, there's visualization and analysis, whereas my experience of GIS has been that probably the primary time I've spent doing it has been about sort of curating information, bringing it together, information that already exists, and obviously mapping it and visualizing it and analyzing it. But it's not so much you're not making information quite so much with GIS as you are with BIM. So this is the AI bit. Broadly speaking, I steer clear of AI. This is a bit of a controversial subject, which is why I decided I'd ask ChatGPT 4.0. And it came, well, actually I have edited it a little bit, but yeah, so it says when you ask, is GIS better than BIM? This is the response. When comparing GIS and BIM, it is not which is better, but blah, 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 yeah, right tool for the job, effectively, which I broadly would agree with. I do BIM and GIS now for my day job. So, apologies for the egg-sucking nature of this for the GIS members of the audience. What is GIS about? Well, if you've ever had a bit of a nightmare with coordinate systems in Revit, GIS kind of easier than that. You can sort of switch between coordinate systems without blinking almost. And some of the visuals that I've got in this are all in the same coordinate system. Others are in a mix of coordinate systems, and they still sort of seem to work fairly well together. The great thing about GIS software is that it's got all the coordinate systems that you could possibly ever want, and obviously this is one that we all use fairly regularly. OSGB 36, nearly everything that I've done is in that. Quite often I'll use data sources that aren't OSGB 36. Coordinates, BIM definitely does GIS definitely does coordinates for you. Base maps. Now, would you like this sort of base map in your design presentations? If I told you it was free? So this is my colorization, I suppose, stylization of OpenZoomStack, which is a free mapping resource that comes from the Ordnance Survey. You can download the whole thing, and then basically this has been brought into QGIS, and I've colored different bits of it. I'm using for the buildings, there are actually 3 scales of mapping, and this is the sort of individual buildings. That's Winchester, where I live. You'll notice that it doesn't have any words on it, and that's because OpenZoomStack doesn't have any names in it. It's a slightly blunt instrument in that sense, but for doing, there are lots of things it's useful for, but there are other things that you might want to combine it with. There's also a thing called Open Names, which Ordnance Survey supply you with, that you can do things like overlay all the names of the towns and the villages. I think the one thing that there is in this that is named are the stations. Another fundamental of GIS, there's a lot of boundaries and there are a lot of points. So this is just a really quick visual, I suppose, arguably, that I've made. So the shaded area is Winchester. I downloaded the, what would they, these are electoral boundaries for boroughs and parishes. That's Winchester, which is the Winchester City Council borough that I live in. And all the dots, any idea what they might be? They could be anything. So each one of those dots represents a listing entry. So every dot there is a listed building. I downloaded all the listed points from English Heritage, and each of those points says what it is. Obviously it's got the coordinates, because otherwise you couldn't say where it was, and it's got a web link to the listing of that building. Kind of useful, yeah? The other thing that GIS does really well is it works with vector graphics. You can see another little clip out of this area. This is actually a piece of photogrammetry data which I've made geotiffs from again in Winchester. I do lots of this sort of work in Winchester, but you can see this was geotiffs that were pushed out of Bentley Context Capture, now iTwin Capture. And of a site and a council estate, which we also captured. Next to it is a bit of open zoom stack, just zoomed in, and can you sort of see it? There's the sports centres in the bottom, and the housing estate. That actually the little inset map is lower scale, but. There are a lot of GUIDs in the geospatial environment. If you import any data into GIS, then the application that you have will give it an ID. But there are also some really cool resources. So this is what you can see on the right-hand side there. Did you know that in the UK there is a thing called a UPRN, Unique Property Reference Number, and every property in the UK has a UPRN. Yeah. So data that you tie, and lots of companies use this. If you're working at scale, and I'm starting to get access to jobs where I'm looking at surveying hundreds of buildings, actually connecting that data to its UPRN is very valuable. You could see how even if you had a BIM of this, it would be useful to have that, perhaps massing. It would be useful to have that UPRN connected to it so that you could tie data from the two things together, data that might actually be easier to get out from a BIM application, but you wanted to then be able to use it, say, in a GIS visualization. And there are lots of other unique references. You know, as you would imagine, the listed building. The listings, I suppose it would be, each one of those has an ID. Interestingly, at the moment, the Ordnance Survey are where they have historically had lots of different data sources that you could pick and choose from. What they're in the process of doing at the moment is aggregating everything together so that, for example, you could call up lots of different pieces of data that they hold, and they've got some really interesting pieces of data, like lowest floor level of a basement in a building, kind of useful, against its UPRN. The listings will be tied to UPRN. The age of the building, it sounds like actually the OS have a better idea of how old a building is than English Heritage do in some instances. So anyway, I carry on. And the final fundamental, your data. Yeah. A lot of the time, really I suppose probably the most technical thing I do with GIS is merge data that I've been given or data that I've created with other GIS information, and that may be spot positions or, well, I'll get onto that. The last example I've got gives you an example of that. So where can I get GIS data? And this is the best thing about it. And everything that I've shown you, that I show you in this presentation, apart from the data that I've been given, like the Dartford Warbler data, is freely available on the internet. There's nothing that I've used that I've paid for, including QGIS, which is a brilliant open source GIS application. Obviously, the Esri is a fantastic application as well. I'm not going to dispute that, but actually for many of the things, and if you're looking at using it, using GIS in your company for something more basic than serving massive amounts of data, QGIS is an excellent place to start. The internet is filled with brilliant tutorial information. I'd be lying if I said I hadn't paid for any teaching. There's a fantastic chap called Alistair Ray who has a YouTube channel, but also some paid content, which has really helped me on my learning journey, I suppose, my sort of where I can go. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to run through some free data sources. So worldwide data sets, absolutely tons of it. What's in the background here is OpenStreetMap, which again, it's another amazing project. You can contribute to it. There's the thing they're really into at the moment is walkable cities, and that's basically somebody going around with a mobile phone app in their hand and walking all the pavements and the little cut-throughs and alleyways and everything, and then uploading it to OpenStreetMap to improve the data in this huge, and it literally covers the whole world. It's in WGS 84, which is a global system, but I used OpenStreetMap before I got into OpenZoomStack as the background for the Dartford Warbler survey. So brilliant. Natural Earth, another brilliant thing. Sentinel satellite data, that's the EU's remote sensing project, which I think the UK is still part of, isn't it? All available to download and play with. I'm at the start of my multispectral imaging journey at the moment, which is interesting and a little bit beyond me at this point in time. Open topography, well, it's obvious what it is. Don't forget, actually I'll get onto that when I get into more national data sets. UN environment data, so that is environmental information, and Terra Populus is sort of demographic and population information. So all the sort of, if you want to make any argument with a sort of spatial argument, spatial and data argument, the data's all there, it's all free. We're fortunate in this country, and actually if you want a sort of heads up on it, there's a really good digital twin fan club podcast from about 2 months ago, if I remember rightly, where Henry Fenby Taylor interviews the guy whose name I've forgotten, I apologise for that, who was tasked with opening up UK government data and making it available for the public to use, I believe after the floods of 2016. At that point, and this was probably when I first became aware of government open data like this, there is this incredible LiDAR data set of most of the country. It's refreshed more frequently in areas that are likely to flood, as you would imagine. But you can basically just download this very, very good quality. And in real terms, my understanding is that it's sort of plus or minus 150 millimeters. Yeah. Terrain data or LiDAR data that you can then put into a survey package or a GIS package and make topography from for free. How cool is that? Yeah, amazing. But there's tons more. On the government portal, if you look right down at the bottom of that list, GeoPackage. Yeah, that's a GIS format, like shapefiles effectively. And you can get all sorts of stuff. So this one, the middle layer super output areas, actually sounds a bit more interesting than it is. It's basically a division of geographical division of the whole country, which a lot of population data and census data is put against that. There's a thing called the Index of Multiple Deprivations, which basically grades each of these areas. It's a whole series of indices, things like access to GP surgeries, access to broadband, I think might be in there, distance from schools, all sorts of things. And then it comes up with a number between 1 and 9 to say how deprived that area is based on these real numbers. Free. Again, you can download the whole data set, you can download the, amazing. This is one of my favourites, this is seagrass. I'm a yachtsman, and anchoring in places with seagrass. I haven't shown Studland Bay. That's probably the most contentious place where there's seagrass, because yachtsmen like anchoring there. and they have, over the last couple of years, they've restricted anchoring there. They've put in nearly 100 moorings in the bay now, and that's because there's seagrass and there are seahorses living in it. It's a protected area. But this is from a thing called Magic, which DEFRA provide, and it's basically a massive list of GIS sources of data that you can use and download for free, and then use in your own presentation, all sorts of things. So there's, if you look higher up this list, where is there somewhere, is habitats and species. So that's where I got the lowland heath, now what's it called, priority habitat areas. I downloaded them from that for the Dartford warbler. Now their territory is lowland heath. That's where I downloaded it for that map. So again, amazing source of data. This is quite interesting in that I saw a post from Highways England, or is it National Highways now, isn't it? About how they are mapping the environment, and I think they're using satellite data, but they're mapping the environment that that National Highways owns either side of the highway for different species types. And it sounds like they haven't actually included any of this stuff from DEFRA, which sounds very unjoined up to me, but you know, such is life. Again, go and have a look. It's the main problem with GIS is that there's so much cool stuff out there that you just spend all the time looking and thinking of interesting maps to make and never make any money, which is probably one of my main business problems. Interested in too much. So this is the index of multiple deprivation. So that's this is just from a website. There's a website you can look at it on. It's a visualization of it. So as you can see, it's generally focused on areas where people live. That's all the grey stuff is. Oh, gone. 2 minutes. Yeah, I better hurry up. Then local data sets. So this was a site that I was working on, in fact working on a fee proposal for, and this is stuff that I just downloaded from the local council's GIS server. So every local council, every county council has a GIS server. If you want to find it, Google it. Yeah, so shape file of TPOs in Winchester, and there you will find a link to probably to a map, and then you'll be able to find something you can plug into QGIS and query or pull down the whole data set. It's amazing, you know. So here we've got drainage with manholes, we've got TPO areas and individual TPOs, that big sort of line that goes across the middle of it, some of the stripes, those are all utility related things. The blue rectangles on buildings are locally listed buildings. So again, massive amount of data there available for free that can kind of help you with your real projects. One of the other things challenges that you very quickly run into with data, so this is the listings again. There's tons of it. A lot of these national data sets are gigabytes, and so what you need to be able to do is quickly filter them down to areas that you want. And again, GIS very, very good at that. You know, if you've got an area like a county or a borough boundary, you can say, make me a selection of all of these points that are in this area only, and suddenly you've got something that's 50 megabytes instead of 3 gigabytes. There's a great power in it, and also the other thing that is that we all need to make our workflow work really well is there's a lot of ability to template and present things clearly. So this is sort of second phase of the Dartford warblers when they sent me data for the whole of Hampshire, and the most interesting thing about this, which I actually did with Excel, I probably could have done it with GIS. Was that I needed to convert the monad data, which is 1K by 1K squares, into tetrad data. That was an interesting exercise. If you need any help with it, give me a shout. I've got a spreadsheet that does it. So some very quick, easy use cases. Project maps and site boundaries. These are examples of flight areas that I have used in fee proposals, but then sent those same flight areas to the UAV pilot that I'm commissioning to fly these areas. Yeah, very easy. Supporting information for projects. This is Central Winchester, which I'm survey partner for, and I've used GIS to effectively present the site boundary that we were working inside, and also agree the locations of the permanent control network for the site. Easy. Business mappings. Now, this is probably one of the interesting things. One of the things about mapping that I always find is that if I say to somebody, would you like me to make a map of that? People go, no, we already know. This is actually, if you've heard, the smartphone-free childhood. Yeah. So in Hampshire, I'm involved in that group. I kind of don't know whether I really agree with the motivation of it, but they were trying to organise themselves into subgroups across the whole county. And it was clear that they didn't really know how to do it. So I said, would you like me to map that for you? And they said, no, there's no need, we understand. So I made this, the thick lines are secondary school boundaries, and the thin, smaller lines are primary, I say boundaries, catchment areas, and the thin lines are primary school catchment areas. So it kind of makes sense if you're in a primary school catchment area that you have a collective group, which is the secondary school catchment area, perhaps. And so I made this map, and as soon as I gave it to them, they said, oh, that's really useful. We didn't know that. It's a recurring theme. In my last job, I worked for Sumo, and I remember saying to them, because the MD had said to me, we've got a very even spread of work across the whole country. So I said, oh, all right, I'm going to take the postcode of every site that we won a job on last year and map it against the counties in which those postcodes fall. And surprise, surprise, 50% of all the work that Sumo had done in the south of England was in Hampshire, where their head office is, yeah, and most of the rest was in London. North of Birmingham, even though they've got an office in Bradford, they only 10% of their work was north of Birmingham. So when I showed him that map, he said, oh, thanks, that's really useful. I said, yeah, maybe think again. But I just think it's just worth looking at the data and seeing what you find. Sorry, I will genuinely stop in a second. So I'm going to very, very quickly, so this is a cool thing that I did working at Kingston University. They gave me their arboricultural information, and I mapped that on, I think this is on OpenStreetMap, because we were doing a big topographic survey on this site. We subsequently used information from their arboricultural survey, and this was our photogrammetry mesh of it. I love photogrammetry, it's the coolest thing ever. And you can see some of it. Unity have built an app with some of my photogrammetry. Won't talk about that. But what we did was we took our topographic information, which was much more accurate, it turned out, than the arboriculturalists' identification and locations of the trees. We also took the local council's TPO information, pulled all that information in, together, and put it on the tree families in Revit. So now, you know, the designer can very easily illustrate which trees perhaps have health problems, which trees perhaps are considered lower value because, you know, like sycamores and things like that. So that's what I mean by aggregating. So I am going to stop after this just to say, go and have a look on Unity's stand. They have got an app that has been made with this data, which is my Winchester mesh, a load of tree points, and a load of listed building points that you can fly around, click on things. It's very cool. I didn't make it, Jack did. And that's sort of what it looks like. I'll stop now. Thank you, and thank you for waiting.